Are we getting ready to start? Are there any more entering right now? Or no? Maybe we could shut the door a little bit and get started with... Okay, I think we're ready. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's talk, which we have called Feminists Preventing War. I'm really happy to see so many of you here, and I'm very happy for you because I think we're going to have an extremely interesting talk ahead of us today. My name is Lina Hjärtström, and I'm a member of the International Board of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILPF, or Internationella kvinnoförbundet för fred och frihet, IKFF, in Sweden. How many of you in here know about WILPF? Show me hands. That's really impressive. I'm so happy. For those of you who didn't raise your hand right now, we are the world's oldest feminist peace organization, going on 104 years. We were founded in The Hague in 1915 by a group of women who gathered during the First World War, and they had this idea that peace would be more likely and more lasting if women took part in the peace process and the decision-making. About peace and security, but really also about everything that concerns us. Nothing about us without us. And we've carried these ideas with us, and today WILPF is represented on all continents and with the UN in New York and Geneva. We work with women's participation in peace processes, with disarmament, and with conflict prevention, this very important idea that gets way too little attention and resources. And you will learn a lot more about this in today's talk. With me today, I have the honor of having Malin Nilsson, Secretary General of IKFF, that is WILPF in Sweden, which means she works daily with questions about gender equality and feminist analysis against militarism and weapons exports. And I also have the great honor of having with me Sylvie Ndongmo. Sylvie is president of WILPF Cameroon. And I could spend a lot of time introducing her and the work that she has done, but I would like to invite her to do that herself instead. So Sylvie, please tell us about the situation in Cameroon and the work that you have been doing there.
You want me to start?
Yeah, please.
Hi everyone. Hi. It's my pleasure to be here, all the way from Africa, from Cameroon, to be able to share my experience and then the experience of African women with you. I come from Cameroon, a country which is in the central part of Africa, a country which has a long history of peaceful country, a country which is now very challenged by security issues because for long, the country took for granted peace initiative in the name of the fact that it was a peaceful country in Africa. In my country, women are 51% of the population. But when it comes to sitting at the tables, political table, decision table, they are relegated to the second places. But we are happy to say that women are fighting hard to have seat on the table, not only to have seat, but to have a place, what to say. But I want to say that we are surrounded in our country by war-torn country. So this forces us to leave our comfortable position of peaceful country to start looking into how do we invest in prevention? How do we deal with peace agenda? The issue that we have from the far north is that we border the countries like Chad, Nigeria, and then we share the challenges with Boko Haram, the same challenges, terrorist sects that we have up there, and which is making us have a lot of refugees in the country. Of course, this has a very negative impact on the community because girls in those regions do not even, most of them go to school. And most programs targeted these regions. But because of this high insecurity, now we have girls shying away from school again. in the east part of the country, bordering Central African Republic, we have the same issue with the refugees. But the most shocking things that we are facing now in Cameroon is there is an internal crisis due to the fact that we were colonized by the French and the British. So we have 10 regions, and among the 10, we have 2 English-speaking and 8 French-speaking. So there is a kind of secessionist crisis. The 2 English-speaking want to have a country by their own. So it's bringing so much tension and violence. But the issue is that it started by the protests, professional protests from the lawyers and the teachers, which now became a crisis of a part of the country wanting to have secession. But the worst is that for 2 years now, many girls, many children have not been able to go to school. Many houses, many buildings, many schools, many hospitals are destroyed on a daily basis. People are killed, hijacked on a daily basis. So it makes my country to be really challenged. And now we just had an election. And the election too did not come to help us because the election also came with a lot of irregularities. So apart from all this crisis, we are now having post-election dispute, which is making the country be at a very, very difficult situation. But we are doing our best as women's organization to a kind of contribute in the best way we can to bring a solution to this. And one of the ways that we use, we are going to talk about this, is an early warning mechanism that makes women and youth to take leading role in the conduct of election before, during, and after the election. I'm sure I'm going to talk about that. But apart from that, I'll end by saying that our work does not stop only in Cameroon. I am also the regional representative of African regional representative of the Women International League for Peace and Freedom. And we have been working with WILPF since 2014. And one of the things that we do, we work across countries, we share our experiences, we learn from one another. The work that we have been able to do in Cameroon since 2014, especially regarding 1325 Security Council resolution, which calls for more women, for women to be involved in peace processes, from prevention to post-reconstruction, we have been able to do it thanks to the support we got from other sections, including Nigeria section, including DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. We have got that support thanks to, I want to really take the opportunity, because I'm in Sweden, to thank Sweden very much, because this support, we have been able to do this work thanks to the support of WILPF Sweden, of the government of Sweden, through Folke Bernadotte Academy and other funders in Sweden. So I'm very grateful on my behalf and on behalf of the African sister. So we are now trying to replicate the same work. She is coming from Chad. I was able to go to Chad in 2014 and also support her to set a group in her country. So this is what we are doing. And now we started in 2014 with 4 sections in Africa. Now we have 16 in the African region. And we are trying to have a regular, what we call regional meetings and on an annual basis. And during these meetings, we share our experiences, we learn from one another, and we're able to replicate the best practices in our different countries. I think I'm going to stop for now and then continue in case there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie. Yeah, I have plenty of questions, actually. And I think I want to steer you into what you talked about in the beginning a little bit, with the work that you have been doing around elections and women's participation in the work around elections and for preventing hostilities. And it's called Women's Situation Room.
Yeah.
Could you tell us more about how you have worked with that?
Yes, this work is very important because for those who know Africa very well, elections in Africa have always come with a lot of violence. We saw it in Kenya, We saw it even in Gabon, our next door neighbor, in Central Africa Republic. Up till now, it is a country which is rocked by violence after the election. So it was good for us to try and learn from these challenges and do something to a kind of prevent, to reduce this violence. But also, I want to say that it's an initiative which was also, we started it somewhere. A lady started it in Liberia, this women's situation room, and it was shared during the pre-summit, because each time the head of state meets in Addis Ababa for their summit, there is also always what we call a pre-summit, gender pre-summit, where African women meet and share their experiences and also have their own recommendation to the table of the head of state. So I was in Addis Ababa in 2012 when this experience, the women's situation room, was shared, and it was decided that it becomes a best practice in Africa. And it was requested that it is replicated in all the countries having elections. So based on that, and after the regional conference that we had in Cameroon in 2015, Nigeria shared the experience of their own situation room, how they were able to make women really get engaged in peaceful initiative before the election. So in Cameroon, we did the same from Nigeria experience. What did we do? We kind of started in 2016. The first thing we did was some consultation meetings, information. The idea was just to share this experience. We have been able to learn this tool. It is about one XIZ. So do you think it's something which is valuable for Cameroon? So we have 4 regional consultation in 4 regions of Cameroon. And the result was really encouraging, because all the stakeholders found that it was a very good initiative. So we had a go-ahead to start working on it. Then we had a national information or seminar around it to inform more stakeholders and then to engage them, including the different ministry. So from there, we adopted a work plan with some activities before, others on election day and after. 4 main activities were conducted before the election: community sensitization, training of electoral observers, training of community ambassadors, and training of youth and women to use social media to build peace. The training aimed at a kind of having peace ambassadors in the community which could support our work in terms of initiating dialogue in community, in terms of trying to have kind of mediation in the communities, but most importantly, in terms of identifying unrest and other incidents in the communities which were likely to create or to fuel violence, and report to the platform. Because WILPF is doing this initiative under what we call Cameroon Women for Peaceful Election. So all these incidents were reported by all these people that we were trained, so that we, in our turn, we were able to make reports and send them to the competent authorities for action to be taken to prevent violence. Then, few days before the election, because the election took place on the 7th, we set up a physical room. And the physical room was equipped with telephones. And the observers on the field, 171 of them, were observing the election, going through the communities, going through the election pools, and observing all the incidents, all the unrest on the field. And they were calling the room through these numbers to tell us the situation, to kind of indicate all the incident on the field. In case there was great dangers, we too would quickly call the police or the gendarme so that they also take action for the danger not to happen. So at the end of the election day, because it was presidential, one day we were able to compile a report on the incidents that happened on that day. And it is because of that that we are able to say that the elections were not transparent in our country, because we were able to kind of make some analysis of what we received from the field. But of course, we had a preliminary report, but we are still finalizing the broader one. Now, after the election, we are now involved in my country, into what they call election dispute. Because there were so many irregularities, the political candidates went to the Constitutional Council with the court, with the case. So the case was heard at the Constitutional Council, but the issue is that the the hearings were done on live. So everybody, all Cameroonian, even everybody out of Cameroon was able to note that there was something wrong. So we are still also now looking into what is going on and also getting reports on what is going on now in terms of violence. And I will end by saying that the situation now is that there is more violence than before because of all this irregularity were noted, and a lot of civil society activists, women, journalists are standing against. They're speaking out. They are making protest march to say no to this. And because of that, they are arrested and detained. Some are in the hospital because they were severely beaten. Some are in jail. Another one was just sent to prison a few days ago. So we are worried, extremely worried because of the shrinking space. Of course, we have good laws in Cameroon, but the issue is that there was this restrictive law that was adopted in 2014, which is called Law Against Terrorism. And now, all the actions of the civil society try to be inserted into this law. The least thing you do, they will say that you are standing against public authority. So that's why it's becoming very difficult for women's organizations, for civil society actors, for political leaders to speak out because they make this good use of this law. Because inside the law, there is no definition of what terrorism is. There's no detail. So that's where we are now in Cameroon. But the women initiative is still very critical and it's still going on because we have some elections coming up again in 2019, the municipal and the legislative, and they bring out more people because we have 180 parliamentarians. So we know that there are going to be more people contesting, more violence. Then we women, we need to put much effort now in trying to prevent conflicts, especially in this coming election.
That was a lot of information. Thank you.
Welcome.
I want to ask you about all of it, but I'm thinking it's time to also let Malin comment on anything, because you talked about women's participation in elections and what women were doing to prevent violence around the elections. And you talked about shrinking space and ways that the government is trying to impede civil society. And another big impediment for women's engagement in society and civil society can be traced back to the arms trade and small arms and light weapons. And so, Malin, I wanted to ask you about this link between the proliferation of arms and gender-based violence and women's participation in.
Well, as you said in the introduction, WILPF is a feminist organization, and as a feminist organization, we analyze war and conflict and violence through a gender perspective. That's the basis of what we do, and we often find that violence is very gendered, both in the reasons behind it, but also in the consequences, of course, on men and women's lives. And small arms and light weapons, as you say, is no exception. If anything, it's a very good example of how violence is gendered. Men own the majority of weapons in the world. Men are also overrepresented in the production and sales of weapons, and also very much overrepresented in discussions about disarmament and how to get rid of weapons. There's also a clear difference in how men and women are affected by weapons. Men are by far the majority of victims of gun violence. I think there are around 90% of gun homicide victims are men, and almost as many, 88% of gun suicides. So men turning weapons against men, but also against themselves, is a very clear gendered aspect of these weapons. Men are also most likely killed by an unknown perpetrator out in the street or in the field outside of their homes. Whereas women, in contrast, though they are a smaller number of people killed by weapons, they are usually killed in their own homes by male perpetrators that they know and are close to, either a husband, a partner, or a father or brother. So we see that these weapons certainly influence men and women differently. And in conflict contexts, like in Cameroon, especially in a country that's surrounded by other countries that are in conflict, weapons flow through the borders quite indiscriminately. And I know Sylvie can talk a bit about how this actually happens. And what we then see is, well, we know from previous research that the gender dynamics or the gender norms that are prevalent in a peaceful society tend to get strengthened if that society falls into conflict. That's also why we see an increase in domestic violence during times of conflict. Violence in a society breeds violence also inside the home. And even taking conflict out of the equation, more guns equal more violence. So the very prevalence of a gun in a household makes it more dangerous to be a woman in that household. You are more likely to be severely injured or killed by your partner. And we also see that small arms and light weapons, maybe I should have said this in the beginning, what we call small arms and light weapons are the kind of weapons that one or maybe a few people could operate. So not the larger weapons systems that we sometimes hear about, but handguns, what we think about when we say weapons. These weapons are also used to control women and to threaten women and to hinder them from using their civil and political rights, from participating in social life, perhaps being kept inside the house. And we also know that guns are a threat, even if they are not openly shown. Just knowing that there is a gun in your household is a hindrance to participating fully in social life. So that's why we talk about gender and weapons a lot. And I think maybe Sylvie should tell us what that looks like specifically in Cameroon.
Yes, I think it's quite true because, as I mentioned, we have some challenges due to the fact that we are neighboring some war-torn country. So even before we had this internal crisis, weapons were transiting in Cameroon, going through Cameroon from Nigeria, entering Cameroon from Chad, and also from Central African Republic. And the consequence is that there is increase of gender-based violence, including rape. In the far north, for example, there are more and more girls, being used as kamikazes. They were on a daily basis. So you hear that these are bomb attacks because of the use by the girls. So they are used into this. So the girls are these tools for that. And in those communities, we still have a lot of socio-cultural barriers. So it's like women are not supposed to speak in public. A girl is supposed to go to get married while the boy is supposed to go to school. So that is why for so long, programs, even international programs, have targeted this region to encourage girls' education. But with the advent of Boko Haram, the situation is decreasing again because the girls are the weapons are being used against women and girls. Most parents prefer to keep their daughters at home, say that it's safe to have. They better have their children, especially their girls, at home because they are at high risk being sent to school because on the way to school they are raped, and this is because of this. And we also conducted in 2015 a small project in Cameroon called Reducing Gender-Based Violence through making popular the Armed Trade Treaty and the UN Program for Action. We were able to show the link between armed proliferation and the rate of gender-based violence. It's very clear that the more armed we have, the more more gender-based violence we have. So this has been proven. So that is why we also have a disarmament unit which looks into this. And one of the things that we did was to advocate for our country to have to ratify the Armed Trade Treaty. The reason being that it's good at least to be able to trace all the arms that come into the country, to be able to do where do we have arms from? Where we are importing from which country? It's very important to know, so that if a weapon is found in a country, we are able to to trace it, to know it comes from this country, it belongs to this. So that's why we are really advocating, and thank God we are able to have the it ratified. But now it's about implementation, to be sure that the weapons do not fall in the wrong hands, because each time they fall into the wrong hands, they are used to perpetrate gender-based violence. Maybe I will end by saying that apart from this issue about the weapons being used to perpetrate gender-based violence, we are also trying to interrogate this issue of the economy of war. Why do we have all this violence? Why do we have all this? Because people gain from the sale of arms. Yeah, if you really want it to stop. In my country, the arms come from everywhere, from the north, from the south, from the east. Even those who are trying, these youths who are trying, they're called rebel groups. That's what they are being called now. But some are more armed than the military. Where do they get this arm from? So it's very also important to really challenge, to ask the question, where do these arms come from? Because I'm talking because I'm in Sweden, and then I know that Sweden is one of the exporters of arms. I want to say that it's also very important to consider the security of other people. What do we at the end of the day? What is our objective? If you are talking about holistic responses, it's about support each other, continent and the other continent. Even the European continent, including the Swedish country, should also be mindful of its law regarding this weapon export, because many women, many people are suffering in the world because of that. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow, Sylvie, thank you. We need to hear that and repeat that all the time. And I'm proud to say that that is one of the things that IKFF does in Sweden. Malin, could you tell us a bit about how we are trying to work to change policy?
Definitely. This is something that we work together with WILPF sections in other countries. First of all, what Sylvie is doing right now, to just talk about the issue. How do weapons affect women's lives in other countries? Because in Sweden, the discussion about arms exports is often a discussion about Swedish jobs or Swedish security, and not a discussion about what are these weapons actually doing in other countries. And it's partly a matter of weapons actually being used against men and women, and it's also about legitimizing governments who let these weapons slip through their fingers, who use them in conflicts, who use them on their own citizens, and that Sweden is actually legitimizing these actors by exporting weapons. And it's definitely an issue that we work a lot on in Sweden. But we also, when we talk about a specific situation like Cameroon, it's also a matter of bringing attention to the conflict itself, because Cameroon is very rarely mentioned in the media. We don't hear a lot about conflict in Cameroon. We don't hear a lot about Cameroon at all in Swedish media, I would say. So this has been, for the 4 or 5 years that we worked together, this has been our main issue, to just get policymakers' attention directed at Cameroon, because we talk a lot about conflict prevention in Swedish foreign policy, which is a very good thing and something that we have advocated for and are happy that is in there. But when it comes to actually doing the conflict prevention work, it's very difficult, because then you have to point at a country that's not in a conflict. Because 4 years ago, that was the fact. Yeah. People would not recognize Cameroon as a conflict country. And then it was very difficult to get anyone's attention to even start talking about the solutions, where, of course, finding a way to stop weapons from flowing into the conflict is one of your key recommendations. So as you can tell, Sylvie and her colleagues are, of course, the experts on what's going on in Cameroon. So what WILPF Sweden brings to the table is our knowledge of Swedish policy making, and in some respect also international policy making, so that we bring forth your analysis to the stakeholders that we have access to, and to raise awareness also among the public, so that the pressure on the Swedish government is not only coming from us, but from a population who recognizes that weapons exports is not how Sweden should be building security in the world.
Thank you. And another thing that we've been touching upon a lot is what we call shrinking space, and it ties in, of course, to women's possibility to engage, to leave the home, to speak out, And of course, not only women, it's just the situation that we're talking from right now, but civil society in general. And Sylvie, you've been talking earlier about how the government has really made it harder and harder to protest, and that they're being more oppressive. Could you tell us a bit more about the government responses and what that is doing to your possibilities to speak out and to try to change the situation and work for peace?
I think the main challenge that we have in Cameroon, not only women's organization, but civil society in general, political leaders, people who stand for justice, is this issue of shrinking space. Because the powers in Cameroon are very much centralized. So there is, even though decentralization is included in the constitution, on the reality, that's not the case. So the power is concentrated in the hands of a few, and it creates a lot of frustration. Therefore, that's why the women's movement, the civil society organization is getting strong in terms of asking for justice. One of the things that I can refer to is the fact that one issue that makes people to be frustrated in Cameroon is the lack of access to basic necessities. In the capital city, many families do not have access to water. They don't. You still have people carrying a bucket on their head and trekking kilometers to get water. So this is unbelievable in this century. Many families do not have electricity. You remember 2 years ago, this story, I don't know, you don't talk about Cameroon here, but horrible things do happen in Cameroon. 2 years ago, a woman died in the hospital, on the floor at the entrance of the hospital, and another woman was trying to save her and took a razor blade and tried to operate on the floor. Yeah, because nobody could attend to her. So, because if you come to the hospital and you have no money, you are just going to die. It's not a matter of emergency. So that's making people to really say, no, we cannot keep. That's not about how do we build sustainable peace. So that's why people try on a daily basis to ask for justice, to ask to have access to education, to ask, and because the government uses a lot of violence, military responses. That is why we talk of shrinking space. Because the Constitution, for example, states that if people have the right to protest, provided the protests are peaceful. But each time, whether civil society organization or political leaders try to do a protest march, they are severely punished, they are arrested and detained. I'm very worried and extremely pained because one of the things that we are doing with the Women's Situation Room is to encourage women's participation in political processes, because we feel that when we have women at the decision table, they will be able to bring up the issues of women. But the way the government is making women to shy away from this. One of the strategies which is being used now is to arrest these women and to put them in jail. Few of them have been arrested recently. Some of them being either civil society organization members or mainly political leaders. There is one leader in Cameroon who was former presidential candidate. She's called Kawala. She's a woman. She's a very strong woman. Her house is on the constant house arrest, right? Every time. Each time she plans to do something, how do we expect women to do something? And when they see women who are really standing strong, they will start using some strategies like defamation, like naming and shaming, like Kawala, and then there's another lawyer who's very strong. She was able to stand at the Constitutional Council and to prove that the elections were rigged in Cameroon. The following day, I don't know whether they were paid or not, but a number of people started on social media, on conventional media, even on TV, calling her with all ugly names that you can imagine. She has 4 children with 4 different fathers. She's a prostitute, and so on. When God was sharing beauty, she came with all these things. And Kawala, when she presented herself to be a candidate, a president, to run for presidency, I heard many men, even in the media, saying that an unmarried woman cannot become a president in Cameroon. So you see, this is being horrible, this shrinking space. So what we are doing is just to try to educate, try to sensitize, try to even advocate and tell the government of the dangers of this, of at least the legal instrument that we have are there to protect both women and men. There should be no discrimination. But we are just saying that trying to learn from the others, from the other sisters organization, to know, let people know that it's all about social justice. It's not the military responses never will make us to attain sustainable peace. So we keep advocating for that in Cameroon. Of course, they are trying to have division, but from 2016, I know that the government of Cameroon is really tired. They are really understanding that there is no need continue in this track, trying to oppress and oppress. We do hope that we are going to continue advocacy, and then they will be able to address it, because the more, I've noticed that the more violence they are using, the more people are getting ready to die. People are saying that, why are we alive for? We better die than to continue living in this condition. So the big challenge in Cameroon is that the government is providing military responses, violent responses to pertinent issues that the populations are raising, because it's all about having access to basic necessities. It's all about justice. It's all about having access to justice. Even some people feel frustrated, but they cannot go to court because they know that the court is like the government. And I personally, when we were conducting this women's initiative, we wanted to invite the minister, different ministry. We went around to different ministries. There was nobody there. For 1 month, they were on the field doing campaign for the president. So there is no distinction between your role as minister, your role as director, and your role as a member of the political party. Therefore, whether you like it or not, if you want to have a good position, if you want to maintain your position, you are obliged to belong to the ruling party. If not, you are going to be in trouble. And then we feel that's not fair. So these are some of the challenges we have regarding the shrinking space.
Yeah, and just to emphasize the courage and of these women who are standing up and challenging the presidency and the ruling government. The current president of Cameroon is on his 7th term since October, and he has been in power since 1982 without a break. So that is the power that you are challenging right now, which is very impressive. And I'm also very happy that you brought up this connection between resources and basic necessities and what people have access to, social justice, and the military responses that we are told can provide this, even though it's shown over again that they do not. And I want to bring this up because I'm guessing that when you traveled here, all of you would have seen the Swedish Defense Forces new commercials that are telling us that if we just leave it up to them, we'll be able to live in peace. And it's getting very clear, at least to me now, that even if that were true for our sake, it's definitely on the expense of people in other parts of the world. So when you walk out of here, pay attention to that and do not believe it for a second. But you have been working so hard also with the Women's Situation Room and your preventative work and the organization that you've done for the elections. And we also had elections recently in Sweden, and we saw a similar development, although on another scale, of increased militarism, increased violence, and racism and right-wing extremism that's showing more and more. So, Malin, what do you think that we could learn from Cameroon and the work that they've been doing?
I know you mentioned very briefly in your introduction, but you've talked about it many times over this last week when we've been to other meetings. You've talked about the hate speech on social media before the elections in Cameroon, and how that part of your preventive work was to engage people in objecting to that, in actually calling out people who were posting things on social media that were hateful or that were inciting violence. And I think that's so interesting because we saw it in Sweden. We've seen it in the news that we actually get in Sweden is very much about the American situation where hatred is coming from the actual government. And I think that's something that we recognize here in Sweden very much, that while we had definitely by international standards peaceful elections, saying anything else would be making small of other experiences, but I think we all felt that something is shifting and that there is a very threatening way of talking about politicians, about civil society, about people who engage in issues that have to do with women's rights, with peace. And I think that's definitely something that we will try to learn from, how Swedish civil society could be more proactive to work preventively on that, because I know you've said that some of the things that were said on social media actually resulted in physical violence because other people took it as, well, I obviously have a lot of people who agree with me that these people don't deserve to live or that they deserve to get hurt, and then went out and actually hurt people. And to put that in connection with conflict and with elections, I think that's very interesting and definitely something we can learn from.
So looking forward, what would you like to be the role for WILPF in Cameroon and for women in Cameroon in the future? What changes do you want to see? What demands are you putting forward towards your government in what way you can?
I think for me, I think education is key, and then I would really like the government to invest in education, because for now, not only education is very expensive, but as I mentioned, for more than 2 years, many people have not been able to go to school. Even in the fact, not more than 2 years, even 4 to 5 years when Boko Haram started. So, and the teachers are also going through a lot of challenges. In the English-speaking zones, for example, teachers are killed. I told my colleague yesterday about the case because the pictures are horrible of teachers whose fingers were cut just 2 weeks ago because in those regions they are trying to dishearten teachers who try to go to teach, to continue teaching. So some are running away, and you either face the government or you face the secessionists. So it's becoming very difficult. For me in Cameroon, I feel that the government should address that quickly because education is the key. We have to address that, and then we have to try and boost the morale again, because all this is trying to dishearten the teachers and then to make the education system very weak. So the first thing I would like my government to do is to address this issue of education, which is key. I would also like it to address the issue of access to basic necessities. Many people still live today with less than $2. It's just horrible. If we consider the high level of the cost of living in Cameroon, but at the same time, we see other people having, like, I don't even tell, they are able to go and, when they are sick, they just take a plane, they go outside. That's not fair. We should address this issue of social injustice by a kind of giving, decentralizing the power and enabling others to have access. I think also the military, we need to address this military issue because the military responses are bringing more issues than solutions. I feel that there is urgent need to have a dialogue because we know when war starts, never when it ends. So until we sit at the same table, or we try to get reconciled, because there have been so many killings that we are obliged to engage into reconciliation. There's no way out. From what she just mentioned, there's a lot of hate messages as day goes on. So the only solution now, and people in Cameroon from left to right, from north to south, are crying for peace, for dialogue. Of course, the government has tried, but when we talk about mediation, the mediator should be accepted by both parties. So the government should really look into that properly, not use the same person who are perpetrating violence as mediator. So there is a need, even if there is a need to ask for the intervention of the international community for neutral person to have proper dialogue, to address difficult questions, so that at the end we come up with solution. If not, we are going to get into mess. And the other thing that we would request is about women. Women in Cameroon are more than 51% of the population. We constitute a strong power, but we are kind of excluded. Women like me, we are not so many because we force our way, but how many can do it? So we are trying our best to encourage other women, but the government is rather trying to discourage. So it's very good, it's very important, if we want to build a stronger country, for women to have a say, for the policies to take into account women's role and participation in different processes. And the last thing I want to mention, because I don't want to stay long, is about, you know, when we go abroad, when we talk about legislation, Cameroon has one of the best laws ever. Yes, in terms of having, it's not a matter of having the laws. We do have very progressive laws. The issue is implementation. We had all this issue, even the English speaking. For me, we have no issue in Cameroon between French and English. No, that's not the real issue. The issue is about frustration. From day one, when people feel frustrated, it brings out all the things that they had. If decentralization, which is in our constitution, was a kind of implemented, we will be able to have all the regions be able to manage themselves, but the power is concentrated in the capital city. And there is misuse of that power by the people at those places at the detriment of the population. So we feel that there is a strong need of getting the country strong decentralization and enable people to have their own destiny at hand. These are some of the things I can really say for now regarding this situation. And maybe now, after the election, for those who know Cameroon, please do from today. Even become my friend today on Facebook. You'll be able to see things. People are, since the election on the 7th, we have never had that for our, so much hate, so much threat. People are ready, they are insulting the president. I've never seen that in my life. So they are able, and with open faces. Therefore, it means that people are ready to die. That is very dangerous. So the person who is claiming to have won the election is asking something very simple, and he is supported by the population. He is claiming that he won the election because the minutes of 32 election pool were changed. So when they went at the Constitutional Council, they just requested for the real one to be shown, so that they made a kind of comparison. But unfortunately, the Constitutional Council did not make it possible. So people are knowing, I said, until this is, so they are asking now for the international community, to the African Union, to get a kind of, how do they call it, recounting the votes, something like that. That the vote should be recounted, and to make everything very clear and fair. And the political candidates are saying that if at the end of the counting, they felt they are going to accept the result, but it should be counted because they have proof, they have evidence that there was something that was done around the mismanagement around this election result.
Are you expecting that to happen, an international recount?
I think it all depends now, because that's why I think that the role of the international committee is very important. Malin mentioned something. I like and I appreciate the support that we receive from Sweden, but we would love to receive other support. Like, for example, when people started crying out something, please, it's good to lend an ear, to listen to their cry. It's not about saying that what Sylvie said is true. It's about international relations. We have Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Sweden. We do have one in Cameroon. Can we try and get in touch and try to have an open ears? What is going on in Cameroon, and also having a say? Because at a certain point, some frustration comes from the fact that even if you are speaking the right thing, you are alone, you are isolated. There's nobody to support, even if it's true. So I feel that at a certain point, the international community, the African Union, need to stand up and really try to see what is really going on in Cameroon. And because we are so divided that we cannot agree in Cameroon, so there is need for other neutral eyes to come and help. So I feel that it is possible if African Union plays its role, if the international community plays its role. So I'm calling for the Sweden authorities also to look into that, because it's making people to die in Cameroon on a daily basis. Thank you.
Malin, what do you think we could do from our perspective based here in Sweden?
I agree with Sylvie. We should listen to Sylvie and all of her colleagues. I think, first of all, if we look, first of all, at Sweden and maybe the European Union, I think we first need to think, do no harm. How can we stop ourselves from making it worse? And the first way that we do that is, of course, looking at the arms exports that are coming out of the European Union. I know Sweden doesn't have any specific arms exports to Cameroon, but like you say, the weapons are coming from everywhere, and it's almost impossible to say where these weapons originated. So making sure that fewer weapons are in circulation would be a very good first step. And then, of course, looking at trade policies, making sure that if we trade with countries like Cameroon or surrounding countries, that trade is conflict aware and conflict sensitive, so that it does not fuel conflict, that it does not support or legitimize actors that are promoting violence or hurting people. And the same goes, of course, for any type of development aid, to have that awareness of what are the conflict dynamics in this country and how could we possibly make sure that we are not fueling that in our work. The EU has not been very strong on conflict prevention. We hear very little from the European Union on conflict prevention. Sweden definitely talks a lot about conflict prevention, which we are very happy about, but there's still the matter of putting your money where your mouth is. If conflict prevention and civil society are the tools for preventing conflict, then that's where the resources need to go as well, and we're not really seeing that yet. And then also, I think what you were trying to say now, to actually react and to show that a country like Sweden is actually aware of the situation. You've said that the violence has very much escalated since the election, but that there has been very little condemnation from other leaders, world leaders, because this is kind of an invisible conflict, and that's very dangerous. It's very dangerous to be an activist in a conflict that other people don't recognize, because you can be thrown into jail, you can be injured, you can be killed, and no one really speaks out because it's not in the focus at the moment. So I think definitely Sweden should speak up, and the European Union as well. Because the European Union trades extensively with many African countries and does not always have that conflict sensitivity that we ask for. Yeah.
Definitely, and from what we have seen, I don't know if any of you have seen any reporting from Cameroon in the last couple of years, but what I've seen is very centered on the conflict between the English-speaking states and the French-speaking majority. And it's very little about the deeper root causes that you talked about earlier, the colonial roots, the situation between Nigeria with Boko Haram and the Central African Republic.
The economic inequality.
Economic inequality, and we have illegal deforestation. There's, I'm not going to go on because we are nearing the end of this seminar, and I would like to see if there are maybe immediately there are questions from the floor. Do we have a microphone that could walk around? Lady in yellow over there was very quick. I'm thinking I could take 2 or 3 questions depending on how large they are, and then let Sylvie and Malin reply.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sakile. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I'm just standing up on a point of solidarity and a point of encouraging about what Sweden can do. I think just to encourage the point about Sweden's role in the EU and also what Sweden does in terms of arms sales. It can't be said enough. But one, we should not only look at does Sweden export arms to non-democratic states, because that is the language that is used in the EU and also used in, because when you say non-democratic states, based on what? You know, and at the end of the day, the list comes down to something less than 26 countries around the world. What we should be asking is, are fragile states included in the list of, and fragile states is a terminology that's used in the development world, so your Bretton Woods organizations, etc. Are fragile states included in the, the sale of arms? Because if you have a fragile state and you continue to support that country with arms and other sales of other, autocratic control, in 5 years down the line, you will have a war, you will have social unrest, and you will have the autocratic means of controlling those societies actually being fully armed, and those who seek to access those arms having those arms. So in terms of long-term sustainability for peace, we need to be able to say, if we can see that there's an early warning in this country that things are not going well, why do we continue? Why should we wait for the disaster to happen before we say, oh, we are now going to include you in the list of non-democratic states? We should look a little bit better at what we talk about. And the EU policy around everything but arms should not be only extended to EU sales directly from the EU, but we know that parts, the manufacturing of parts and the manufacturing of the things, the components that go into arms come from other countries around the world that are actually now moving their sales points to those countries to facilitate getting around the EU rules. Those people who because for me that's sanctions busting. Why are we not calling it out, and why are we not talking about it? Because we should not be living in fear or saying, oh, because our government is behaving well, they're currently not protected from accessing arms, and then when things go wrong, they're already armed.
Good.
Thank you. We have another question in the front, or comment perhaps.
Sorry. I'm okay.
Thank you. My name is Peace Hirari. I'm from Rwanda. I run a media house called Family Magazine in Rwanda. I work with the women media in Cameroon. We have organized Peace Hirari. I'm from Rwanda.
The name of the magazine?
Family Magazine.
Okay. Okay.
I work with the women media in Cameroon. Yeah. We have an organization called FEPSAC.
Yes, I know.
Femmes de Presse pour la Paix et Sécurité en Afrique Centrale. You know it.
Yeah.
One of us called Adeline Sede, the CEO of Fab Afrique.
Yeah.
We work on CEDAW and 1325 resolution. Yeah. So how do you collaborate with these women in media? What is support do you want from us?
Okay.
Which support do you have from the government? Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like to reply?
Okay. Another one, then we...
Okay, sure.
Ingvar Rönnbäck, another development foundation. You talked about the need for education, putting in efforts. Can you say something about what the feminist peace education would look like?
And you have about 2 minutes to do that. Thank you. Okay, Sylvie.
Okay, thank you so much for my sister from Rwanda. I just came from Gabon, where I had a meeting with Melissa, who is the coordinator of FEPSAC. The meeting we had was around how we work together in Central Africa to address this issue. So we are working not only at national level, but at regional level. So the meeting I had with Melissa was, how do we work in all the 11 countries to be able to address this issue holistically in all these different countries? So one of the things that we agreed, I remember maybe we were in Douala or Yaoundé, was to start supporting FEPSAC, because I want to just remind you, I know you know it, that FEPSAC was supported by WILPF Cameroon. We encourage it to be set because we had an initiative in Cameroon with the National Action Plan. When we started the advocacy, it was very difficult to sensitize because people did not know about it. So that's why we had to rely on the media and train media in Cameroon who supported our work. So when we shared this experience with the UN office in Central Africa, that's where they got the idea of creating FEMSAC. So, but now we are in try with Melissa to be able to raise funds because the FEMSAC members have the goodwill, but they really need capacity building. So we are working very hard. But in Cameroon, we are working together. Even as peace, these ambassadors I mentioned, we train the media. We all involve, especially those who were, I know all of them are not always available, like Adeline, like Clarence, but the one in Yaoundé, she's available. So we try and engage the media. And I want to be very honest to say that the role they have played has been very key, even in helping us to have a national action plan. So do rest assured that FEMSAC is one of our strongest tools, not only in Cameroon, but at the level of Central Africa. Regarding feminist peace, for me, I think it's about challenging the patriarchy. Yeah, I think it's about challenging because if I look at the case of Cameroon, Chad, and others, there are so many sociocultural barriers who are still standing against women's participation. So I think feminist peace for me is being able to address these root causes that undermine the women's role in peace building. So it's about not having women to be decorating the table, but to be able to make impact. So for me, it's not about having women for having sake, but about having women who are able to make a change, who have a say. So because I know that in my country, for example, and in some countries in Africa, they try and say, okay, let's put 20% of women just because it's a requirement of the international community. No, it's about having women and giving the women the opportunity to have a say, to make positive change. So I think that's what I can say about feminist peace, being able to challenge these root causes of conflict that prevent women from getting a say at peace table. I don't know whether you have
agree. I don't know if I have anything to add to that, but definitely, I mean, that's what feminist peace is about. It's addressing the root causes of violence and recognizing that some of those root causes are gender inequality, it's the patriarchy, it's also economic inequality. And to address those root causes is the way that we promote peace. Yeah.
Thank you. And if you have more questions that we won't have time for today, now, because what I wanted to say is we have more time for questions outside a little later. Sylvie will be at a place called Arbetsplatsen, the working space, from 1:45 to 1:15. So you will have half an hour's opportunity to have a talk with Sylvie and ask your questions or start collaborations or get organized. You are, of course, all welcome and encouraged to join WILPF or IKFF. We have flyers outside and we are on ikff.se or wilpf.org. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming and for asking questions on these difficult and complex topics. I hope everybody here has learned something new or maybe questioned something that you thought you knew. I know I have. So I will see you outside at Arbetsplatsen, 1:45. Thank you all for coming.